Welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. This is the podcast where we explore the people and stories that make up the tech and venture ecosystem. Don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, and share the podcast because it really helps us get the word out to more people who are curious about understanding even more about the world of venture capital. This season of Nothing Ventured is sponsored by Odin. Odin helps angels, VCs, and founders to raise and deploy capital seamlessly. You can structure your SPVs and now run your funds, handle capital calls, portfolio management more smoothly and easily in one place. Founders use Odin to raise their entire round in a few clicks by simply sending investors a link and receiving investments immediately. Odin works with over 5,000 investors and over 150 emerging fund managers and angel syndicates globally. Head to joinodin.com to learn more. That's joinodin.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I was really happy to have my long-term friend, Shruti Ajisaria. Shruti is a partner at Allen Overy, the second largest law firm headquartered in the UK by revenue. She has, for the last 6.5 years, been head of Fuse, Allen Overy's legal tech incubator, which provides a collaborative space where teams can experiment with, develop, and test legal, regulatory, and deal-related solutions. In today's episode, we talked about being backed by the senior partner even as a random derivatives lawyer, her pivot from a travel app to legal tech incubator, how the legal industry is changing because of the client, not because of the lawyers, and how she went from £1 million menu to a pizza and a pitch in her living room. Let's get straight into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured. Today in the studio, I am really excited to have with me my good friend Shruti Ajisaria, 30 years in the making. If you haven't already checked it out, do have a look at our primer episode where we unpack a little bit of Shruti's background. We're going to go into a bit more detail even now. But for the meantime, Shruti, really great to have you in the studio with me.
Thank you very much. This is so fun.
Amazing. So let's dive straight in, right? Your journey to creating Fuse at Allen Overy is a relatively complex one, and it involved a challenge from your kids, campus for moms, putting a legacy industry into the modern age. Can you take us through that journey and how you think it evolved and where you started and where it's gotten to, I guess?
So I had been a derivatives lawyer at Allen Overy from my whole career. I started in 2002. I'm so unimaginative. I started in one department.
You are, by the way, only the second person I know in my entire life who has joined one company and stuck with it for the next 20 years, and the other person, my sister. So it's quite sad to have that juxtaposition.
And you love us both.
Yeah, I know,
how nice
crazy.
is that? It's loyalty, you see. I started there. I did a subject matter. I was doing derivatives. I did credit derivatives. I loved it. I loved the work. I really enjoyed the clients. I'm aware that I sound like such a knob right now, but I really did. I really liked it. And so there was no kind of like, I'm looking for something more interesting happening. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't unhappy with my life at all. I was really happy doing the work I was doing, but I had a maternity leave. So it was my third maternity leave. And I kind of by that point knew that I could spend a maternity leave doing more than just sort of having coffee with other new mums. And I was sort of overdoing that anyways. I didn't really want to do that.
There's only so many new mums.
There's only so many new mums. And also I was old. I was an old new mum by that one. I wasn't even a fun, cool mum. I was just like a bit blah. So I signed up to this amazing thing that was done at Google Campus. So at the time, Google Campus was being run by the amazing Sarah Drinkwater.
Yeah.
And she had come up with, I just
need
think
to get her on the podcast as well.
She is fabulous. Yeah. She had come up with, and I sometimes see her now and I still tell her, I think she thinks I'm a crazy stalker, but she really it changed my life because she came up with this idea of having people who were on maternity leave or paternity leave or with relatively young children be able to come and learn how to start up a business. And they held it at Google Campus, and the magic of it was you could bring your baby. And so you'd applied with a business idea. I had an idea about a travel app for kids at the time.
I remember.
You applied with an idea, you got onto the course, and then you had, I can't remember, like 12 weeks or something of a course teach you like the basics of starting a business. And then at the end, you had a business plan that you then had to present to someone who was like a VC or someone who could give you some money of some description. So that was the premise of the course. It was amazing. I started with this travel app, and about 2 weeks in, I said to Sarah, I was like, actually, I really want to do something in my law firm. And totally sure that she thought I was a massive disappointment, because that's not really what it was for. It wasn't
It's
really
not very startup.
Yeah, it wasn't very startup to make your corporate a bit more exciting. That wasn't really the point of it. But that is kind of what I spent the next few weeks doing, is developing a business plan to start an incubator in Allen Overy. And so coming out of my maternity leave, I had a really well thought out plan as to how my law firm could engage with the outside world and legal tech. And I really genuinely do feel there are very few law firms in which you could go to the senior partner and say, oh, I've had this idea. I'm just a kid. You've never met me before. Nice to meet you. Here's my brilliant idea. But our senior partner is just magic. And he has always been brave and always really believed in innovation and trying things and kind of taking risks, and is a real businessman, actually. And so he basically gave me the freedom and the budget to go and start up Fuse, which is a physical space based in our London office, in which we select the best in class legal tech to come in, and then they have access to our lawyers. And very often really what we're working towards is a pilot. So we'll try their technology, we'll give them feedback and work on it sort of iteratively in collaboration, so that we wind up at the end with a product that we really like and that is useful to them. We don't take equity stakes. We don't put in place anything that makes it difficult for them to succeed, because in the end I want them to do well, and part of my role is to make sure that we're supporting them.
So you don't restrict them.
We don't restrict them to only working with Allen Overy. Typically, I mean, there is the odd case where we put so much in that we have to sort of discuss what that looks like, but for the most part, really, we are really trying to give first. It's, sort of Techstars give first mentality. We really do try and do that as much as we can. And it's been going for 6.5 years now. I think we've had more than 60 companies through. They've all done great. I'm super happy with how it's worked out.
But you won't talk about any of them individually. I think there's a few things that are really interesting there, because I think Google Campus is now shut down. It's been quite a while,
the physical space has shut down now, which I think is a terrible shame.
Yeah.
I think that's a real shame.
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time there when I was sort of trying to figure out what I was going to be doing in life. But I mean, the Campus for Mum sounds like an incredible course, and I would hope that there's potentially something online maybe that they've done and pivoted to. I don't know if it required, maybe Sarah's intelligence behind it and her magic. Yeah. I think the other thing that's notable, and I think really incredible, because most of us think about law firms, you do think about the fact that they are quite kind of old boys clubs, quite sort of tight knit, very sort of resistant to change. And at the time, you weren't partner, right? Because you only made partner relatively recently over the last few years. So, I mean, to be able to go in and sort of pitch something and be given the budget to do that seems like it's quite a big deal.
Well, the story is this, actually. So Wim had an idea that he wanted to do something in innovation, I think, and had called in kind of the expert in the field, who's a guy called Richard Susskind, whose kids actually went to our school, and who
all kids went to our school, yeah, sure.
In a small world.
Yeah.
But he's written lots and lots of books about technology and the law, very well respected. And Wim had actually asked our head of innovation at the time, who was a partner, an old banking partner who'd become our head of innovation, to invite Richard Susskind to a meeting. And the luck of it really for me was that Richard and Jonathan, who was the partner at A&O, were late to the meeting, because Richard was late coming into Allen Overy. Jonathan was waiting for him downstairs in the lobby, and I was standing outside the senior partner's room just waiting. And his PA very kindly said to me, Shruti, you're on time. Why are you waiting for them? You just go in. And so I went in, and I had about 6 minutes, not even that long, I don't think, with the senior partner. And I just sort of vomited words and told him all the things I'd seen. And I'd spent loads of time on my maternity leave actually visiting, like JP Morgan had at that time an incubator, yeah. Deloitte at that time had an incubator. I'd gone to see some of like the more corporate ones. I'd been in a lot of stuff, done a lot of research, and I had a really clear plan of what I wanted to create. And so I had just like a really short period of time to just not be a bag carrier.
Yeah, you basically had to give your elevator
pitch. And
instead
right? to give my elevator pitch.
Yeah.
And I think that was like the luckiest 5 minutes of my life, because I think if I'd have waited for Richard and Jonathan, I would have sat quietly in the corner, I'd have written notes, I'd have been, the good girl that you know me to be. And I'm not sure I would have really said, actually, I think we should do it this way, and I want to do it this way, and this is what we should do, and this is how we should do it, and this is why it will be different, and this is what, and I know it's a risk, but this is what we should do. And I always think of that moment because what it's taught me is that even if you don't get the 5 minutes, even if you turn up with everybody else, you still should always be brave enough, to shoot your shot.
Yeah, 100%. This season of Nothing Ventured is proudly sponsored by Emerge One. Emerge One provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups and scale-ups. They work with businesses from C to Series B that have been backed by some of the UK, US, and Europe's best venture capital funds. They provide support from capital allocation and management, KPIs and reporting, fundraising support, financial modeling, investor relations, and investor management. Come check them out at emergeone.co.uk when you're scaling fast and have need of a CFO. And I think it's one of the things in startup life that is really difficult for a certain type of person, right? Especially, I think, I see it a lot within the kind of finance domain. People aren't that used to kind of selling themselves, right? And but it is the most important part of startups, right? Like, you are always selling. You're either selling equity, so you are pitching investors, you are pitching to employees, because why should they join your 100 grand invested startup, right? Like, you've got no money and an idea, why should they join you? You're pitching to customers, you're pitching to your partner as to why you should give up your really cushy job in the city, right, to start this crazy startup. So I think 100%, I think there's a lot to be said for the entrepreneurial path. And I think a lot of people suffer from the fact that they are scared or ashamed or embarrassed to just shoot their shot. And yes, they may be turned down. Yes, they may hear no, but that may be from 50 people, but the 51st person may say, actually, this is a really bloody good idea. You should go ahead with it.
And actually, just to make the point, because the converse is also true, which is that good leadership, in my heart, I was thinking, well, here he's got this amazing expert who's been writing books for 100 years, and then me, this idiot derivatives lawyer who's never met, who's somewhere on the 7th floor in the building. That was my credentials. And I think the thing that makes Wim a really, really good leader is that he gives people an opportunity, and then he backs them, right? And I've always appreciated that about him, that even though I wasn't a partner, even though I was just a complete random nobody doing credit derivatives, not even startup stuff, he gave me the opportunity and he gave me the freedom to go and do it as I wanted to. And I just always thought that was so brave of him, because if it had all gone totally wrong, the blowback really would have been on him for having supported me. And I think that is such an incredible characteristic of a good leader, and I've seen him do it time and time again for other people, but it is what differentiates him as a leader. And it's something that I've always tried to remember as well, which is, as a leader, when you're in the room and you have the opportunity to shoot your shot, you have to try and shoot your shot, but as a leader you also have to be prepared to take a risk on someone.
You have to, look, so I think the way it goes is you have to back yourself first, and then you've got to find other people to back you, right? You should never do it the other way around, right? Don't wait for other people to back you. You've got to take take that plunge yourself. Having built 2 businesses, having had one of them not do particularly well, or essentially go to zero, you have to have, I guess, the courage of your convictions. And I think the big problem here in the UK, I think, is that we just have a very, very poor attitude towards failure. So I think in the US, there is much more encouragement about trying, failing, trying again, right? If you go bankrupt, it's not a negative thing in the US to go through a Chapter 11 or to go bankrupt. Obviously it has its issues, but here in the UK, there's a sort of sneery, snidey kind of looking down your nose at people that don't make it, or try something and don't get it right. And
that's the joy of the American dream, isn't it? Everyone's chasing the American dream, whereas here we're sort of chasing mediocrity.
Yeah. Oh my God. We could go into one of my cousins once said to me that we are bound together in our mediocrity rather than in our success, and I think that that mediocrity, which we're all feeling, I think, a little bit of at the moment here in the UK, is quite sad, and hopefully things will change over time. But let's kind of move forward. So look, one of my clients, AutoGen, which is also founded by an old haberdasher just like us, just raised a $20 million Series A from Blossom Capital. And it seems that there are lots of ventures now building in this sort of legal tech space. So when you think of, or when anyone thinks of a legacy kind of old school business, law is definitely amongst the top of the funnel there, probably amongst the top 3, with accounting probably being in there as well. Do you think that lawyers are embracing this evolution that we're now seeing that legal tech is bringing, or is there still some resistance? And how do you think they should be thinking about that tech and the potential it has to be disruptive to their existing business and to their roles, on the day-to-day kind of basis?
It's a really complex question. But in the end, when you work in a law firm, from the minute you enter those doors, what you learn is that the client is king. So what the client wants is what you will deliver. What you, I suppose, are also trying to do is to maximise the revenue that you're going to get for every piece of work. And there are 2 ways of doing that. Either you kind of quote an amount of work, you quote an amount for the piece of work, and you just do it really efficiently by yourself, and you're like, ta-da, it only took me 3 hours, I thought it was going to take 5 hours, great, happy news. Or else you use other methods. So some of that is alternative resourcing. So for example, we've got an office in Belfast. Some of that, a large part of that increasingly is technology. Mm-hmm. Now, lawyers have... if you imagine I started in 2002, and by the time I stopped practicing, which was maybe 6-7 years ago, I was still doing everything in Word.
Manually, yeah.
And I was still doing everything. Look at me. I printed this off. That is like my heart and soul. I'm still a paper. I've got, hello, fountain pen. What is wrong with me? Yeah. And this is me.
I can't use it because I'm left-handed. But
do you know what I mean? This is actually me. I actually am working in legal tech, and still I like to carry a piece of paper around with me everywhere. And so lawyers are not the fastest people to want to change. It's not in our bones to want to do things differently. And I'll explain to you why. It's because as a lawyer, you have to deliver to the client something which is perfect. You feel like you have to give them something which is 100% right and there's no room for error. And so any risk on that, any change presents a risk. So if you know that you did the last transaction perfectly, even if it took a bit longer than it should have done, even if it was a bit harder to turn the documents than maybe it would have been, you know that you have done it perfectly and there is a process to getting there, which is manual. The sort of the easiest reach for you is to do the same thing again.
You don't want to risk changing.
You don't want to risk the perfection.
Yeah.
And to your point about the risk of failure, it's really, I think that's the hardest thing for lawyers, is you never want to present your client with something which is late or wrong. That's the first thing. But what it means then is you get stuck in doing things exactly the same. So for me, there was very little progression in terms of how I'd worked over the years. And it was interesting because in all of our private lives, so much was changing. So I wasn't ordering taxis using a telephone, calling my local cab company. I was using Uber. I wasn't trying to cook. As you know, my cooking is not always the best. So I wasn't trying to cook. What was it I made that for you that you were so ungrateful about? Hot pot pie?
I don't know. There was some pasta involved.
No, it was amazing. It had hash browns and it was layered. Hash browns, baked beans, veggie sausages. It was actually an act of genius. But I wasn't trying to do that anymore. I was using Deliveroo, right? Everything was moving on in life, but not in my job. And I suppose that was the thing that lawyers, we couldn't accept that the new thing could be better, because we weren't willing to give it a go.
Also, there's a sunk cost mentality, I guess, or put in 4 or 5 years to get, to pass the exams, to have done all the work and so on. What is this upstart piece of technology? How's it going to do better than me? It hasn't gone through that 5 years, and I've gone through that 5 years, and that's what you're actually paying for. I think I see that a lot, kind of again in the finance accounting world. This assumption that people can always do things better. Well, no, there are some things that computers can absolutely do better. I think the big shift that has to happen in these sort of legacy businesses is to think about all the transactional stuff, right? All the repetitive rules-based stuff actually should be automated away.
It should be automated. But the thing that has changed the conversation is actually the clients.
Yeah.
So I suppose all I was going to say is that it's not come from us, the lawyers who are working in the law firms. It's come from client demands. When a client says, actually, you can't quote me X for this piece of work because I know that you should be using technology and I know it would be a Y piece of work if you did it properly, then we start to invest in looking at different ways of working.
Yeah. And I think, look, just taking that point a little bit further. So yes, there is the efficiency question, there is the cost reduction question. I think there is also the maximization point, right? So to your point, you want to maximize revenue. Well, okay, one of the ways of doing that is by increasing productivity by using technology to do more, to be able to service more clients. But I think where both in the kind of legal space as well as I say, in the finance space, things become interesting is yes, the transactional stuff can be automated away, but actually what people like you and people like me in the kind of CFO world, the value that we bring is actually the experience, right? Which is you can't replicate that experience with technology now. Can LLMs get there? Possibly over time, but there's always going to need to be almost certainly someone that is even checking the homework of those LLMs, and that only comes with the nuances that you get from having written that derivatives paper, 350,000 times over the course of your career, or been in front of a judge and knowing kind of how they are likely to use their sentiment and their background to kind of look at a particular case, right?
And that's, I think, the bit that actually is quite interesting now, is because the other thing I was going to say, which has been a real driver for change, has been nowadays generation have a different perception of jobs and what they want and what they're prepared to do and the hours they're prepared to put in and what their expectations are by way of job satisfaction. They want to learn. They don't want to do. I mean, when I turned up at Allen Overy, I spent basically the first 6 months in a basement, grateful that I had a massive pile of documents in front of me and I never went home. That was like what my expectation was. That's not most people's expectation coming into a law firm anymore. So first you have to cater to a different expectation and provide someone with a better quality of work. But the bit that gets actually really interesting is if that generation are entering at a point in time where none of that groundwork is being done themselves,
how do they build up the experience?
It's going to be really hard for them to build up the experience. And that's the thing I haven't actually got straight in my head, which is in 10 years' time, what will a good model of a law firm look like? Like, will you need trainees? What will they be doing? How are you supposed to succession plan? So if someone isn't doing any of the drudgery and they can't then progress from the drudgery to the harder bits, where are they going to learn? Where is that training ground? And I don't think that's anything. I don't think that's something that anyone has really solved for yet. But it will need solving for, because you're right. As the sort of lower end of the work gets automated away, or you can use generative AI to produce you an answer, the thing that will really, really matter is the expertise.
It's the opinion, right? And this is I think it sounds like you and I should probably have a offline conversation, because I think a lot about this in terms of finance. So I was trying to dig out actually kind of trends in terms of new lawyers coming into the profession, and it looks like it's been relatively stable. In fact, it's grown maybe 6-7% since 2021. Maybe that's just because post-pandemic lots of people suddenly decided to become lawyers. I'm not entirely sure, but I know for a fact within kind of the accounting profession, those numbers have been dropping steadily. No one wants to become an accountant, right? And the problem is that, yes, accountancy is quite stuffy and boring. When you get into industry, that's where it becomes interesting, but you can't do one without the other, right? And so you're then coupled with a twofold problem, which is A, yes, is that training ground even available? But B, are there even people that are willing to come into the industry to do that, right? And then that actually leads to potentially more technology to replace kind of the lack of skill set that's even coming into the profession, right? So I think these are very hard, very long-term questions that they're not going to be overnight solutions, because this transition and this change will take some time, albeit that with what we're seeing with things like generative AI, they're happening a hell of a lot quicker than one maybe expected even a year ago or 2 years ago, right? I think, in terms of what you guys are doing at Fuse, especially actually being at the forefront of that, means that you're probably going to be better placed to tackle it than others that haven't kind of.
Yeah, I hope so. And we're obviously thinking a lot about it. But I don't think the answer is easy at all. And we're seeing it already, actually. Like, we're able to use generative AI at Allen Overy. You can ask the system a question, it can pop out an answer, and it sounds completely confident. Like, who is Shruti Ajisaria? It turns out Shruti Ajisaria, according to the system, is I'm someone that worked at Goldman Sachs. I've never. But I was like, oh, did I? Do you know what I mean? And so you have to have a confidence in your knowledge to be able to argue against something which looks like in black and white very sensible. Yep. And I think that is where the rubber's going to really meet the road. Yeah,
I 100% agree. So look, switching tack for a second, you have been a prolific angel investor alongside your husband, Nilesh. that you are also an investor in the first series of £1 Million Menu, which I now have found is on Netflix. So I am going to be watching that, which is a kind of mashup of Dragon's Den and MasterChef. But you've kind of dialed back a little bit from the investing. You're still active, but maybe a little less so than you previously were. Can you talk to me and talk me through your kind of approach to investing, what you learned through the process, and why you have dialed back, and why you kind of changed tack a little bit now?
Yeah, sure. So we kind of fell into this whole thing by completely by accident. It wasn't like a plan. But we started investing quite a few years ago, initially in a restaurant business, so nothing tech related at all. And it was really just the opportunity was there. It sounded kind of interesting. It sounded sort of fun thing to be involved in. And that was it. So we started this weird thing of kind of almost every other Sunday night we would have a founder come in at about 8 o'clock. We'd have pizza and some beers, and we'd have like
Nice.
an hour of a pitch, chat through our questions, and then they would go. And I would know that on the Monday I'd have to be up, go to work, sort out my kids, like life was going to get in the way. So we'd really make a sort of choice that we were going to make a decision like that night. So maybe someone would leave at 10 o'clock, and by 10:30 we would know like we're either in or we're out.
So like pure
It
gut.
was total back of the envelope, gut rubbish.
Yeah.
And
Which often is actually the best way of doing it, to be honest. But
yeah, sometimes.
certainly at the early stage, yeah.
Sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. And it was not. It was just sort of a hobby. Do you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, because we were doing it so regularly, all of a sudden we had like a gazillion companies that we'd accidentally sort of invested in without really thinking about it. And it turns out that it's quite a lot to manage. In fact, like someone's always run out of money, someone's always about to go bust, someone always needs something. And, what I think I've learned now that I didn't really know then is you can be a good angel investor, or you can be sort of a bit of a crap angel investor. And I didn't appreciate that investing money in a company comes with responsibilities, and that actually some of what you should be doing is keeping track of what they're doing. If you can help them, make sure you make the relevant intros, thinking about them, thinking about how you can make connections for them, when they need more money, really being able to take the time to sit down and think, okay, well, am I ready to follow on, rather than just being like, okay, I've got half an hour at the end of a Sunday night. It stops being that quite quickly.
it becomes a job.
It does. It becomes a job. And I think I certainly feel that we've invested in so many different companies. It's really hard to do that properly. And so for me, and also I'm completely cognizant of the fact that we were not doing it in any way, shape or form in an intellectually rigorous way. It literally was like, do you want some pizza? Do you want a beer? We've had an hour.
Have a check.
Yeah. Yes or no.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really like the way they smell. Or like, there was not, really wasn't. There wasn't very much.
They chewed really loudly.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't eat their crust. It's so wasteful. So for now, I think, just life is so busy, and just at a point in time where just accumulating these extra responsibilities non-stop is just not for me. And what's more interesting is actually looking at the scale. And it's interesting, like, because when I started Views, everyone was looking at startups, and then over time, everyone's kind of like graduated towards scale-ups, recognizing that startups are a lot of work. It's time intensive. It's difficult. And all the incubators that I originally sort of started with have sort of over time slowly moved towards later stage companies. And I feel like that's what we've done with our investing, which is typically something has to be a bit more mature, a bit more grown up.
Traction.
They have a bit of traction.
Yeah.
You need to be able to see the way they're going. You need to be able to get a sense of where it's going to go in the next couple of years at least. And I prefer it because it feels more steady. It feels less hard work. I feel less a sense of responsibility, to be honest. And I just think it's difficult to do good angel investing alongside having a busy actual normal life.
Yeah, no, I think from personal experience, it is very difficult. It's also very difficult. There are so many opportunities out there which all sound amazing, right? So then differentiating between one or the other becomes very hard, especially again at early stage, right? Like there are a million generative AI businesses that will come and pitch you, right? Like how do you know which one is the right one to get into? But then equally, I think to your point, the further up, the further up that they've scaled, obviously your return profile changes, but B, you're less likely to need to follow on, right? And you only then tend to follow on if you actually want to, right? If you're thinking like this business is going somewhere, you're not doing it necessarily because they need, they need the cash. It's more like, okay, this is now about growth. And actually, I think there's a lot of literature out there that says that, angels should rarely follow on their money. They, you should always look at each additional investment as if it is a standalone investment rather than,
Can you tell Nilesh that? If you could just send me that.
I'll dig it out. I actually wrote about it in my newsletter recently.
Oh, please send me that newsletter. I will send it to my husband because we have like such opposite views on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I mean there is a debate as to whether you should hold whether ownership matters or whether or whether it doesn't. A lot of people I speak to, one in particular actually, Mark Cohen, who's been on the podcast before. Who is very mathematically minded and used to build artificial intelligence platforms. Anyway, he has a very strong opinion that actually ownership is not it's not the right way of looking at it. You should look at all investments, I think, singularly. But no, I mean, look, that makes a lot of sense. And I think to your point, there comes a point in life. You said I think you have 3 kids, right? Well, I know
you have 3 kids.
I know you have 3 kids. You have a husband at work. You both work. You are on to my knowledge, the board of a school, the board of governors of a school, board of the London Zoo, if I'm not mistaken, amongst other things. So there is a limit to how much time you can also dedicate, right? So I think you have to understand from a life perspective what matters, where your priorities are, and it doesn't make sense to just kind of blindly keep putting money out there if it's going to be difficult for you to manage. So just as we wrap up, right? Finally, you've obviously found your home at Allen Overy. You've been there for over 20 years. Now, and
it'd be so awkward if I get fired tomorrow.
Yeah, it'll be really crazy, but it's fine. We'll dub over. There's now tech that does that as well, right? And the legal profession back then certainly looked a hell of a lot different to what it looks like today, given the explosion of tech, LLMs, variety of platforms have begun to productize some of the more repetitive actions that we've discussed, that activities that lawyers and associated staff would undertake in the past. So what advice would you give for people that are entering the legal profession today, especially those that do want to bring a more forward-thinking, dare I say it, disruptive kind of attitude to the industry?
I actually think there is so much ground there. I would be so excited to be a lawyer entering the profession today. Mm-hmm. And I think people are really down on like, oh God, you're not going to need lawyers anymore. It's not going to be done by computers. I think that's really wrong, because to the point we were talking about earlier, I think there is absolutely going to be a place for expertise. Yeah. And generally, in my opinion at least, the expertise is the fun bit. I loved being a credit derivatives lawyer because I actually wasn't creating swathes and swathes and swathes of transaction documents. I was just doing a few small paragraphs really carefully, and I loved that so much. And so I'd say for a young lawyer entering the profession, they need to think about, firstly, where they, like, I know it sounds silly, but kind of like what department they're going to go into, what they're going to specialize in, where the areas are which really require deep technical knowledge that is going to be difficult to replicate in the future, and also like an area that's always evolving. So you think about like regulation. Being a regulatory lawyer is a kind of really interesting space now, because it's changing at a very fast pace, and you have got all of the history in your kind of back book, but you also understand sort of gutturally, I suppose, what is happening in the future and what the implications are likely to be. So I'd say, firstly, pick your space really carefully. And secondly, even in the kind of the most techie of sort of, when I say techie, I mean sort of like wordy techie, not techie, but like in the most sort of intellectually difficult bits of law, there is always something to be said about how you deliver the advice to a client. So I was talking to someone actually the other day, and they were saying, oh God, they're a really good lawyer, like technically, but they don't really understand that the business guys don't want a 40-page memo of law. They just want an issues list, which is, here's the 5 things you need to care about.
Here are the risks. Here are the things that you might want to consider. This is what
I advise you. Yeah. By the way, Annex 1 to 4,000 in the back is like the covering my arse stuff. Yeah. But really, here's what you need to know. And I think there's a lot to be said for thinking about how you present stuff to a client. And you can use technology to do that, so that they can find things again, so that they can refer to things again in the future, so that they can use something as a base, so that they can compare things. And lawyers are quite far off doing that. They don't think about it. They just sort of type up a memo of advice and attach it to an email and sort of send it. So I think there's a lot of ground still for young lawyers to cover. And I'm really excited for the profession.
Yeah, no, I think, the future is a different country, right? Like you don't know what it's going to look like until you get there. And one thing that we've learned is that technology, it rarely kind of kills anything off. It just changes the way, that you have to approach certain things. And I think, law especially is one of these areas where actually, when you take away some of the more kind of time consuming stuff, right? Where you make accessibility to case law faster, quicker, immediate, right? Like you all of a sudden, exactly to your point, you unleash the potential for, the really forward thinking lawyers to actually go out and do some interesting stuff and actually spend time thinking about actually how should the law work, right? Like in these certain cases, and rather than like, okay, this is how it has worked and this is how we have done things, because I haven't got time to think about how it should change. Now I actually have time to think about how it should change. I think your point around regulation is super interesting. We've had Leo Ringer on the podcast before. Leo, runs a fund which really sits at the intersection of regulatory challenges. So, and his point there is like, even something that is tangentially related to regulation is stuff that they look at, because over time, that there is likely to be some sort of regulatory kind of impact, right? Listen, Shruti, it's been absolutely incredible having you on the podcast. It feels like we could probably do another 2 or 3 of this. I say this almost after every podcast, but I definitely do mean it this time. For our audience, if they want to find you online, where's the best place for them to look for you? Are you on LinkedIn?
I'm
Twitter?
on LinkedIn. And I thought that the reason I came on the podcast was because I was going to be able to like share funny stories about you from when we were kids. Is that going to happen?
Not going to happen.
I have so many.
Not today.
You can find me on LinkedIn and ask me funny stories about Aarish.
Okay, all right. Well, with that said, Shruti, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure. I really, really have enjoyed having you here today.
And me, thank you so much.
Awesome.